From the moment I was old enough to comprehend the world around me, faith was the cornerstone of my life. Growing up in the quiet town of Springfield, nestled somewhere in the heart of America, my earliest memories are of Sunday mornings at the church. My mother, a gentle and devout woman, would hold my hand tightly as the choir's voices filled the air, harmonizing in praise. She often said, "Without God, we are like a ship without a compass." Those words were not just advice. They were a creed that shaped my entire existence. As I grew older, the simplicity of life in Springfield became the backdrop for my evolving faith. My father was a carpenter, a man of few words but immense kindness, who often told me that working with your hands was a form of prayer. I spent my boyhood helping him in the workshop, shaping wood while listening to him talk about the beauty of creating something lasting. Despite his humility, it was clear he saw God in the details of every beam and joint. Our church, a modest yet warm building on the edge of town, was the heart of the community. The wooden pews, polished by generations of families, felt like home. Sundays weren't just a day of worship. They were a time for connection, for neighbors to gather and share their lives. It was here that I first felt the quiet pull of something greater. Even as a boy, there was an unspoken sense that God had woven a thread of purpose through the fabric of my life. By the time I was a teenager, the call to serve was undeniable. While others my age dreamed of college, adventure, or escape, I dreamed of the altar. My friends would laugh when I turned down parties or outings to spend more time at church, but it didn't matter. I wasn't chasing the approval of people. I was chasing something eternal. Becoming a priest wasn't just a decision. It was a calling. It felt like my destiny had been written long before I understood it. The path to priesthood was both rigorous and sacred. Seminary life in Chicago was a world apart from the quiet streets of Springfield. It was a time of discipline, study, and prayer, where the Bible became both a guide and a mirror, reflecting truths I was only beginning to grasp. I immersed myself in theology, memorized scripture, and learned the intricacies of rituals that had been passed down through centuries. My professors often spoke of the priesthood as both a privilege and a responsibility. I took those words to heart, vowing to be a vessel of God's will. After years of preparation, the day of my ordination arrived. Standing in the grand cathedral, with sunlight streaming through the stained glass, I felt a profound sense of belonging. The weight of the priestly vestments was both literal and symbolic, a reminder of the sacred role I was stepping into. As the bishop anointed my hands, I whispered a silent prayer. "God, use me as your instrument." It was the most beautiful moment of my life, a culmination of years of faith and devotion. My first assignment took me to a small parish in Bentonville, Arkansas, a community much like the one I had grown up in. Life in Bentonville was simple, but deeply rooted in faith. The congregation welcomed me with open arms, treating me as both a spiritual leader and a member of their extended family. I baptized their children, officiated their weddings, and mourned with them at funerals. Every day was filled with the rhythms of priestly life, prayers, sermons, and the quiet moments of counsel with those seeking guidance. Yet, despite the outward fulfillment, there were whispers of doubt in my heart, ones I dared not share. A priest is supposed to be unwavering, a pillar of faith for his flock. But in the stillness of the church, when the candles flickered and the silence grew heavy, I sometimes felt a strange emptiness. Was I truly walking with God? Or was I merely performing rituals? The question lingered in the quiet corners of my mind, one I couldn't ignore but didn't know how to answer. As the years passed, the routine of priesthood began to feel like a well-rehearsed play. My sermons were eloquent, my prayers devout, but something was missing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leading people closer to an institution rather than to God Himself. It was a thought that both haunted and humbled me. I prayed for clarity, for a sign, but the heavens seemed silent. Little did I know, everything was about to change. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for being part of this journey with me. Your support means everything. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. By joining our community, You'll be part of something much bigger, a shared space of faith, hope, and inspiration. Let's grow together and continue spreading messages of love and light. Thank you for being here. The evening began like any other. The small town of Bentonville had settled into its familiar rhythm. Families gathered around dinner tables, the last glows of sunset casting long shadows across the quiet streets. Inside the church, I had just finished my final prayers for the night. The scent of old wood and candle wax filled the air, and the distant hum of the wind rustled through the stained glass windows. I had been alone for a while, seated in the dim light of the sanctuary, staring up at the crucifix that hung above the altar. My mind drifted as it often did in moments like this, circling the same quiet doubts I had learned to suppress. Am I truly serving you, Lord? It was a question I had asked countless times, but never dared to answer. I had dedicated my life to God, yet there was an emptiness I couldn't explain. It was a hollow space in my soul, a feeling that despite all my prayers, all my duties, something was missing. I sighed, running a hand through my hair, the weight of exhaustion pressing against my shoulders. The church was silent except for the occasional flicker of the candlelight, casting dancing shadows along the stone walls. And then it happened. At first, it was just a strange pressure in my chest, a dull ache that made me shift uncomfortably. I adjusted my posture, assuming it was fatigue, maybe the strain of another long day. But then the pressure intensified, spreading like fire through my ribs, tightening around me like an unseen force. A sudden wave of nausea hit me. My vision blurred. The candle flames stretched into distorted streaks of gold, and the room seemed to tilt beneath me. I gasped, reaching for the pew beside me to steady myself. But my fingers barely brushed against the polished wood before my legs gave out beneath me. The pain surged down my left arm, sharp and relentless. My breath hitched, shallow and uneven. I was dying. The realization struck like a thunderclap. My heart pounded violently in my chest, a chaotic rhythm that drowned out every other sound. I tried to call for help, but no words came. I was alone. I stumbled forward, my knees colliding with the cold stone floor. My hands trembled as I reached toward the altar, as if touching it could somehow tether me to life. But my strength was fading fast. My vision darkened at the edges. The weight in my chest grew unbearable, like an anchor dragging me into depths unknown. And then, all at once, everything stopped. The pain, the fear, the desperate gasps for air gone. I was no longer in my body. I don't know how to explain it. One moment, I was collapsing onto the church floor. The next, I was weightless, detached. A strange stillness enveloped me, like floating in deep waters, except there was no water, no ground beneath me, no walls around me. Just silence. I became aware of the room again, but not as I had known it before. It was as if I was seeing it from an entirely new perspective. And then I saw him, me, lying motionless on the floor, my body crumpled, my arms limp at my sides. The dim candlelight flickered across my pale face, and I could see the small smear of blood where my head had struck the cold tile. I was dead. I should have been terrified, should have felt the crushing panic of knowing my life had ended. But I didn't. Instead, there was an eerie calm, a strange acceptance. I hovered there, watching the scene below me, unable to move, unable to look away. And then I noticed something else. A shadow. It moved just beyond the reach of the candlelight, flickering between the pews. At first, I thought it was a trick of my blurred vision, but then I realized it was getting closer, and it wasn't alone. The shadows moved unnaturally, slithering between the pews like living smoke, stretching and shifting as they approached. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, that it was simply the flickering of the candles casting illusions on the walls. But then I felt them. The air grew heavy, thick with an unspoken presence. A coldness unlike anything I had ever known settled over me. Not the absence of warmth, but the presence of something else entirely. Something dark. I wanted to move, to turn away, to run, but I had no body, no limbs to command, no voice to cry out. I was merely an observer, floating above the lifeless shell of my own existence. The shadows grew bolder. They no longer lurked in the distance. They surged forward, their forms twisting and churning like ink in water. They had no faces, no defined features, yet I could feel them watching me, whispering. At first, the voices were distant, a murmuring wind that slithered through the silence. But as the shadows closed in, the whispers grew clearer. You do not belong here. The words weren't spoken aloud, yet they reverberated through me, settling deep into the core of whatever I had become. You are ours. A cold, unseen force tugged at me, pulling me away from the light of the altar. It wasn't physical, but it was undeniable, a grip on something deeper than flesh. Panic surged within me. I fought against it, but how do you fight when you have no body, no strength, no breath? The darkness thickened. The whispers turned to hissing, a chorus of voices speaking in unison, pressing against me from all sides. You wasted your life. You never truly believed. You are not worthy of him. Their words burrowed into my mind, cutting deeper than any physical wound. Every insecurity, every doubt I had ever harbored rose to the surface. The silent questions I had ignored for years came roaring back. Had I truly known God? Or had I merely followed rituals, performed duties, worn the robes of faith without ever letting them become a part of me? The pull of the darkness grew stronger. I was slipping, sinking, being drawn into something vast and endless. I tried to pray. I tried to whisper his name, but no words came. The realization struck me with a force more terrifying than death itself. Without my body, without my voice, I was powerless. I had always believed that faith was unshakable, but now, in this moment, I saw how fragile mine had truly been. It had been built on routines, on traditions, on obligations, not on true intimacy with the one I had served. The shadows circled, tightening their grip. The church that had once felt like home was now a place of unfamiliar dread. The walls loomed higher, the candlelight dimmed, and the whispers became an unbearable roar. You were never truly his. The force pulling me downward intensified. The weight of despair settled over me, crushing, suffocating. Then, a light, faint at first, like a distant star breaking through a storm. The darkness recoiled, hissing in protest. The light grew, spreading outward, warm and pure. It wasn't like the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital or the golden glow of the candles. This was different. It was alive, and in the center of it stood a figure, radiant, strong. I couldn't see his face, not at first, but I knew who he was. The moment his presence filled the space, the whispers ceased. The shadows trembled, their twisted forms unraveling like smoke caught in the wind. The darkness had no power here. And for the first time since I had fallen to the church floor, I felt something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. The presence in the light was unlike anything I had ever encountered. It wasn't just brightness. It was warmth, a force that didn't just illuminate, but filled every corner of the space with an overwhelming sense of peace. The shadows recoiled, shrinking away as if burned by its very existence. They hissed in defiance, but they no longer had power here. And then, the figure stepped forward. He was both distinct and formless, a man yet something far greater. The very essence of love radiated from him, wrapping around me like an embrace I hadn't known I needed. Though I couldn't see every detail of his face, I felt his gaze, and in that instant, I knew it was him. His presence was undeniable. This was not a dream, not some trick of the mind. I was standing before the one I had preached about my entire life. And then he spoke. Michael, my name, spoken not as a mere call, but as a knowing, a recognition of everything I was, everything I had ever been. It wasn't just a name, it was my soul being called forth. Tears welled in my eyes, though I had no physical form. How could I cry when I had no body? And yet, the weight of the moment pressed into me, breaking through every barrier, every doubt. I had spent years studying scripture, memorizing prayers, following rituals, believing I knew God. But standing here, before him, I realized I had never truly known him. "You have served me," he said, his voice both gentle and powerful, resonating through every part of me. "But have you truly known me?" The question shattered me. Had I? Had I ever truly sought his heart? Or had I merely followed his rules? I wanted to answer, but my voice, if I even had one in this place, was caught in my throat. I had spent decades leading others in faith, guiding them in prayer, teaching them about the love of Christ. But now, face to face with him, I saw the gap between knowing about him and knowing him. He stepped closer, and I felt the weight of his love pressing into me, not as a burden, but as a force so vast it could not be contained. It was not a love I had earned. It was not a love I deserved. And yet, it was freely given. Tears streamed down my face. "I thought I was serving you," I whispered. "I thought I was doing what you wanted." "You have done many good things," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "But faith is not just about what you do. It is about who you are with me." His words unraveled something deep inside me. I had spent my life focusing on duty, on structure, on obedience to the institution of faith. But had I ever sought a true relationship with him? Had I ever opened my heart fully? I fell to my knees, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but because the sheer presence of his love was too much to stand beneath. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I see it now." Jesus knelt beside me, his eyes filled with nothing but love. "It is not too late, Michael," he said. "You can know me. You can still walk with me." His words were an invitation, a lifeline. This was not the end. This was the beginning. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to thank all of you who are watching. Your support means the world to us, and we love building this community together. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps us reach more people with these powerful messages. And now, I have something special for you. In our next video, we'll be giving a shout out to some of our incredible viewers. Want to be one of them? Comment below your name and the city you're watching from. Imagine your name being heard by thousands of people. It's your moment to shine. So, let us know where you're watching from, and we might just send you a special message in the next video. Don't forget to like, comment, and let's keep this journey going together. The light around me pulsed, alive and full of meaning I could not yet comprehend. Jesus remained before me, his presence steady, unwavering. Though I had spent my life preaching his name, standing here in his radiance, I realized that I had never truly grasped the depth of who he was. I had devoted my life to him, but I had done so through rituals, obligations, and duty. Now, standing in the presence of perfect love, I saw that faith was never meant to be about rules. It was about relationship. Jesus extended his hand, and the warmth that emanated from him filled every part of me. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before, pure, unshakable peace. And yet, beneath that peace, I felt something else, a calling. "There is more I need to show you, Michael," he said. His voice was gentle, but within it carried the weight of eternity. I knew this was not a request. It was an invitation to something greater. I nodded, though words failed me. And then, in an instant, the light around us shifted. Suddenly, I was no longer standing in that sacred radiance. Instead, I was witnessing something beyond myself. It was as if I had been lifted outside of time, observing from a vantage point I could not explain. Before me, scenes from my life unfolded like pages of an open book. But these were not just memories. They were revelations. I saw moments from my priesthood, moments I had once been proud of. I saw myself standing at the pulpit, delivering sermons with confidence, my voice steady, my words eloquent. I had thought I was leading people toward God, but now, seeing it from this perspective, I noticed something I had never seen before. The faces of the congregation, so many of them looked empty, searching. Some were nodding along, following the structure of the service, but in their eyes, I saw a quiet longing. They weren't just seeking guidance, they were seeking him, and I had been too caught up in the rituals to notice. Another scene appeared before me. This time, I was in a hospital, standing at the bedside of an elderly woman in her final hours. I had held her hand, whispered prayers of comfort, assured her of God's love. I I had thought I was bringing peace, but now I could see something I had been blind to before. I had been there physically, but my heart had been elsewhere. I had spoken the words, recited the scripture, but I had not been present with her. I had not truly seen her. And it wasn't just her. It was all of them. So many moments in my ministry had been filled with actions, but lacked the depth of true connection. I had been teaching about God, but had I been leading people to Him? Had I shown them His heart? Or had I simply given them the rules? The truth pierced me like a blade. I had spent my life trying to serve, yet I had missed the very essence of what it meant to follow Christ. I turned back to Jesus, and He was watching me with an expression that was both sorrowful and full of love. "You see now," He said. I did, and the weight of that realization threatened to crush me. "I failed you," I whispered. Jesus shook His head. "No, Michael, you have been faithful, but you have yet to truly know me. And now you have a choice." "A choice?" My voice trembled. "You can return to the life you knew, continue in the ways you have followed before. Or," He paused, stepping closer, the warmth of His presence washing over me. "You can walk with me, not as a servant bound by duty, but as a son who knows his Father's heart." Tears welled in my eyes. I had spent my entire life trying to be good enough for God. But here, in this moment, I realized that He never wanted my perfection. He wanted my heart. Jesus reached out and placed His hand on my chest, over where my heart would be. At His touch, I felt something shift deep within me. A fire ignited. Not a fire of fear or obligation, but of love. A love so vast and consuming that it left no room for doubt. I didn't just want to serve Him. I wanted to know Him, to walk with Him, to lead others to Him, not through rules, but through love. The decision was made, even before I could speak it. Jesus smiled, as if He had known all along. Then, just as quickly as the vision had begun, the light around me began to shift once more. I felt myself being pulled back, drawn away from this place of peace. The warmth of His presence did not fade, but I could feel the return of something else, something heavy, something physical. I was going back to the world, back to my life, but nothing would ever be the same again. A rush of sensation flooded over me. Weight, warmth, the distant hum of voices. The light that had surrounded me moments before began to fade, and I felt myself being pulled back, as though gravity had found me once again. I gasped. Air filled my lungs. My eyes fluttered open, squinting against the harsh fluorescent light above me. It took a moment for my mind to register where I was. The smell of antiseptic, the soft beeping of machines. This was a hospital. I tried to move, but my body felt impossibly heavy. My chest ached, my limbs weak, but none of it mattered. I was alive. A nurse rushed to my side, relief evident in her expression. "Father Michael, can you hear me?" I swallowed, my throat dry. My voice came out barely above a whisper. "Yes." The next few hours were a blur of medical examinations, concerned faces, and hushed conversations. The doctors told me I had suffered a heart attack, that they had nearly lost me, that it was a miracle I had survived. I knew better. It wasn't just a miracle, it was a calling. I had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at living with purpose. The truth of what I had experienced burned within me. It was more than a near-death experience. It was more than just a vision. I had stood in the presence of Jesus. I had seen the weight of my life, the gaps in my faith, and the truth of what He had been calling me to all along. And I could never go back to the way things were. The days that followed were filled with quiet reflection. Friends from the parish visited, offering prayers and well wishes, calling me blessed to have survived. I nodded and thanked them, but inside I knew this was not about survival. This was about transformation. When I finally returned to the church, everything felt different. The same wooden pews, the same familiar scent of wax and old books, the same towering crucifix above the altar. And yet I saw it all with new eyes. I no longer wanted to lead out of obligation. I wanted to lead with love. I no longer wanted to speak just to be heard. I wanted to speak to bring people to Him. My sermons changed. I no longer preached about rules. about following tradition for tradition's sake. I spoke about Jesus, about knowing him, not just through ritual, but through relationship. Some welcomed the change. Others resisted. Some clung tightly to the way things had always been, unwilling to step beyond the comfort of routine. But I was no longer afraid. I had seen the truth, and I knew now that my mission was not to preserve traditions, but to bring hearts to him. As I stood before my congregation that Sunday morning, I looked out at the faces before me, some eager, some uncertain, some searching. And I knew this was why I had been sent back. Before we move on, I just want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for being here. This channel isn't about money. We don't earn anything from this. We do it because we love sharing these stories, these messages of faith, and this incredible journey with all of you. If you believe in what we're doing, if this story has touched you, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. It may seem small, but it makes a huge difference. It helps us reach more people, grow this beautiful community, and continue spreading these powerful messages. So, if you haven't already, take a second to subscribe and be part of this journey with us. We appreciate you more than you know. The days turned into weeks, and yet, the memory of what I had experienced never faded. If anything, it became clearer. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel the warmth of his presence, still hear his voice calling my name. And so, I changed, not because I had to, but because I couldn't stay the same. I began to live my faith differently. No longer was I simply following the motions, going through the rituals of priesthood because it was expected of me. No, I now knew Jesus, and that changed everything. I listened more. I prayed differently, not with recited words, but with an open heart, speaking to him as a son speaks to his father. I spent more time with people, not just to guide them, but to truly understand them, to see them. And something incredible began to happen. One by one, others began to change too. A woman who had stopped coming to church years ago returned. Not because she felt guilty, but because she wanted to know Jesus for herself. A young man who had been caught up in a life of resentment and anger found peace. Not because of anything I said, but because he encountered him in his own heart. The church walls no longer felt like barriers keeping people in or out. Instead, they became a place where lives were transformed, where the lost were found, where faith became something living, breathing, real. I had almost lost my life that night in the church. But in truth, I had never been more alive than I was now. Because now I knew him, and that changed everything. My friend, this is just the beginning. What I experienced changed my life, but I truly believe that God has something incredible waiting for you as well. There is something important that you need to see, something that could reveal exactly what you've been searching for. It's right there. Click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now. Don't ignore this moment. Watch it until the end, and you'll understand why this message is meant for you. And before you go, if this story touched you in any way, take a second to like this video and comment Amen below. By doing this, you're not just engaging, you're affirming your faith, stepping into something greater, and continuing to be blessed. I'll see you in the next video.